I'm Brian Winnikins. So we are at the Irrigation Association and the National Groundwater Association Convention in Las Vegas. And I'd like to say thank you to the Irrigation Association, also the National Groundwater Association, along with Annabis Silo of Durand, BASF, Ashley Gausman, your agent in Northwest Wisconsin, and also the Animal Wellness Center of Buffalo Valley for supporting our broadcasts. I am with Tom Downey. He is the 2006 president of the National Groundwater Association. He is from Nebraska, and we're going to talk about some of the things that go on in Nebraska and how it might even relate a little bit to Wisconsin and the upper Midwest and nationwide. And Tom, thank you for joining us today. Well, first, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in Nebraska. You got a pretty important job.
Yes, we do. We provide groundwater services, drilling and pump installation for mainly an agricultural client base. Based out of Lexington, Nebraska, with branch offices in Alliance, Nebraska, as well as Garden City, Kansas.
Now, where you're located, you're on what I think is the largest underground aquifer in the country, and that's the High Plains Olagala aquifer. Say that 3 times fast, but it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, the Ogallala aquifer is a big deal. The Ogallala Formation of the High Plains Regional Aquifer, and it's provided groundwater irrigation for Nebraska, Kansas, parts of Oklahoma, Texas, parts of New Mexico, and a little bit of Wyoming. And it's a big deal. Irrigated agriculture, which development started mainly large scale in the 1960s with the invention of the center pivot. And it's a big thing to our overall economy in Nebraska is irrigated agriculture.
I know in Wisconsin, one of the big things with some of the high-capacity wells that are used for irrigation is we need to update them because maybe there's the age, or a landowner sells, and then there's all kinds of other issues with that. In Nebraska, do you have the same issues? It looks like most of the infrastructure is already in place. You're not going to put in more, but you may have to do some updates.
Right, yeah, we do. Our business is based on replacement wells and helping the producer get more efficient. For the most part, Nebraska, the ground has been developed for irrigation is developed. Some areas have moratoriums, not so much on wells, but on additional irrigated acres. So we're in a point in time where the development happened maybe even as far back as the 60s or 50s, 60s, 70s. We're down the road 40, 50, maybe in some cases 60 years. It's time to replace the wells in and of themselves, along with some of the updates on the pumps. While the pumps may have been out to add efficiency, if we had flood to center pivot maybe come along, as energy costs got more, then we looked at more efficiencies. And so we're continually using the technology that's out there to help producers make their bottom line better. And in these days, with the commodity prices, the bottom line means a lot.
We are talking with Tom Downey. He is the 2006 president of the National Groundwater Association. Tom, now, before we went on the air, one of the challenges you're facing with these replacement wells, you're having to drill them deeper. Is it because the aquifer is drying up?
In some areas, it is. In the Central Platte Valley, where our headquarters are located, we have a system that's pretty much in balance, and we have the probably the best of a lot of worlds. We have the sand hills of Nebraska, the largest dune stabilized by vegetation area in the world, I believe, that acts as a big sponge. That's the ranch country of Nebraska. We have the North Platte River system, in some cases some of the South Platte River system that relies on snowpack that flows right through Nebraska to help us recharge the areas in central Nebraska. So we have a system with the natural resource districts and what's been done over the past several years, that we have a system that I believe is sustainable. It's relatively in balance, that we can weather droughts and then take advantage of the wetter cycles to build the bank, so to speak, in our groundwater resource. Now, in some areas, such as Southwest Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, it's not so much the case, where the groundwater levels are depleting, and the better material of the formation, the coarser gravels of the Ogallala, have now been dewatered. So we are working on ways and using technology and and those types of things to try to get these wells to produce from deeper depths with finer grained material, and also from the pump side of things where the producer can do more or as much with less water and be more efficient.
Talking with Tom Downey. He is past president of the National Groundwaters Association, and he was president in 2006. You mentioned that it's getting more difficult and you have to drill deeper. Is there going to be a point where those areas where it can't recharge as quickly as where you're at in Nebraska, what's going to happen in the agriculture there?
Well, I think producers will have to adapt, whether it's with their crops, more drought-tolerant crops, maybe some of the areas that are more sustainable, such as the Central Platte Valley, Nebraska. Maybe the yields will become more greater, and we'll have to pick up the slack from that. But I think the agriculture industry, since I believe the beginning of time, is a resilient industry. I believe it's productive. I believe it's adaptable, and I think they'll find ways to deal with this. But certainly the areas where the water is depleting over time, it's of concern, and I believe whether it's in the regulatory side of things, government and producers, they're stepping up to the plate to deal with it, to try to prolong it and use it as in the most efficient way as possible.
Been talking about the agriculture side of all of this as well. Obviously, I know in Wisconsin we occasionally will have issues where the cities kind of butt up against agriculture. With our wells are drying because of all of the irrigation, and so we get that conflict going on. Are you seeing that in Nebraska or in some of these areas to the south that may not have that recharge?
Yeah, you can kind of see that in several different ways, depending on where you are. Sometimes in Nebraska, if there's a nitrate issue in a community, or the finger is pointed at agriculture, and of course there's some issues there with how to deal with that. In some areas, if it's a dry year and the water level does pull down, that can be an issue for the public water supply wells. In southwest Kansas and some of those areas, on the regulatory side, there are some areas where the formation or the aquifer under the Ogallala, the Dakota, the Cretaceous, the lower Cretaceous formation, which has sand in it, has been segregated, I guess I'll say, from being developed for agriculture. Not that it's a big production zone, but in the areas where that's the only zone for public water supply, then the state has come in and said that that's off limits as far as irrigated agriculture. So I've seen that a little bit, but yeah, it certainly can be a problem in the areas that may not be regulated, and certainly it's a cooperative effort between regulators, the individual state governments, local natural resource districts as we have in Nebraska, and certainly the local governments and the Department of Health or whoever regulates the public water supplies in that particular region.
Talking again with Tom Downey, the 2006 president of the National Groundwater Association, here in Las Vegas at the National Groundwater Association and Irrigation Association's annual convention and show. Tom, you mentioned surface water. It plays a big part in this balance and sustainability. Is there, I think, a concern in everyone in irrigation and in water and groundwater that we haven't had much infrastructure built in many, many years in the United States to maybe save some of this surface water that we receive?
I think so, and I think California would be one area that maybe that would indicate that with the environmental issues out there, Endangered Species Act and things like that. I think the ability to capture runoff and surface water has maybe been somewhat inhibited by those endangered species or by the environmental sector, but maybe even bigger than that, or certainly a big portion of that, is those types of projects cost a lot of money, and we all know how our federal government runs at a deficit and things like that. So yeah, it's the surface groundwater connection is important in the areas where there is a connection between surface and groundwater, but even bigger than that is the overall water budget, the overall water supply, whether it's surface water from snowmelt precipitation runoff, whether it's groundwater, and then the commingling of groundwater and surface water. You have to look at the whole water budget, the whole supply, and manage it as best we can to utilize that to do the things we need to do, and a big part of that's grow food for a growing world.
Tom, again, we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Tom Dewey, he is past president of the National Groundwater Association. We're at the Irrigation Association and National Groundwater Association Convention and Show in Las Vegas. I'm Brian Winnikins on Real Country 1430 WRDN.